took part today in the launch of the most recent publication of the World Bank. In your opinion, how important is that document?
Well, this is a very important document of the bank. We produce one World Development Report every year, and for the last years there has never been one fully devoted to education, and I think this is the key importance. We are reviewing the situation of education around the world, and it's very important to advance the dialogue, international dialogue in education with the different countries. So this is a very unique opportunity for putting education at the center of the dialogue of the World Bank.
You have released the World Bank report in Romania. Is it a coincidence that you have chosen Romania, or does the choice have a certain meaning?
Well, it has a deep meaning for us at the World Bank. First, we have been a partner with the Romania for several years, almost 25 years. Since 1990, we have had several projects and analytical work and advisory services that we have been doing. So that's the reason number one. For us, Romania is very important in terms of partnerships. Second, we have a very important project that is being implemented in the country, which is the largest in our Europe and Central Asia portfolio. It's a 200 million euros project, which is trying to address fundamental issues for Romania, and that's the second reason. And the third reason is that some of the messages of the report we think are relevant for the country. In particular, the inequities that we observe. Romania is a country in which you see some cities and regions very dynamic, growing and advancing, while you see other regions which are a little bit poorer, they are less dynamic, and then they are trying to catch up to the other regions. So inequities are important. We see inequities in between rural and urban settings, but also in terms of some of the situation of education, we observe some challenges that are picked up by the report. For example, we see that in international assessment, Romanian students are not performing that well as we will wish to, and as compared with the other European Union countries. So some of the messages of the report, even though not the same level that we observe in other regions, are still relevant for the country, and that makes it interesting to motivate the internal discussion about what can be done to address these issues.
The World Bank report has the following title: Learning to Realize Education's Promise. Could you explain a little bit the symbolistic of the title?
Yes, so the title is very important because it put learning at the fourth center of the report. For many years, the international discussion in education has been on bringing children to the classroom and ensure that they stay in the classroom. However, what we have noticed after the evidence from several student assessment, of learning assessment, we have come to the conclusion that the schooling or being in a school is not equal to learning. So that's why in the title we're putting that the key emphasis should be in assessing whether students are learning at the schools. And for us, schooling without learning is a waste opportunity, right? And then, of course, we got lots of evidence to suggest that the most vulnerable are the ones that are usually getting the poorer results in a school. So at the same time that the school is schooling is a waste opportunity if you are not learning, at the same time it's a great injustice for the poorer, who are the ones receiving the poorer scores.
You know very well the system of education from Romania. What could be the weak points and strength points of the system of education?
I see the country that has several strengths. It has a goal to achieve the Education 2020 targets, and that's very important. We see also that the country has an importance of education is there in the several stakeholders important in the country. We see education at the fourth center. The country also has several strategies in place that are being implemented in higher education. There is a strategy for vocational education and lifelong learning. There is a strategy to address early school leavers. There is a strategy for investment in in education. Perhaps, so those are the strength points. The strategies or what need to be done and the vision is there. What we see the challenge is, of course, implementation. I think that in some of these areas we see lots of progress. For example, in higher education we see tremendous progress in the country. In other areas we see challenges. For example, in the early school leavers, we see still the country is very far away from the target, and this is something that the country really need to address. Overall, you have like close to 1 in 5 students leaving early the education. This is in between the 18 to 24 years of age, and these are people who leave without completing secondary education. That's very important, but at the same time we see lots of differences among people who are from poorer backgrounds, in which the percentage could be very high, as opposed to people living in urban settings in which the percentage is lower. So addressing that inequities is also very important.
Speaking about early school leavers, how can this report help Romania to have not so many people leaving the school?
Okay. So I think that the report has different lessons, and one of them is very important, which is act on evidence. In other words, use what we know from international experience and as well from Romanian experience, what works to really help reducing the early school leavers, but also know what doesn't work in order to do that. So acting on evidence, but also trying to have the actions coming up from the schools themselves. So that's one thing which is very important. Act on evidence, but also be bottom up is also very important. But also another message from the report is very important, which is to ensure that the schools work for all students. And that means putting a particular emphasis on the students which are struggling, and that means students who are at greater risk of dropping out from the education. So I think those two messages are very important from the report and could be, and I know the country is really using those in order to set up policies to address these early school leavers.
There is in Romania a paradox of the educational and social system. After finishing their studies, the best students do not find work in Romania or find it very difficult, many being forced to accept jobs below their qualifications. At the same time, the social system prefers the less trained. I could say there is a strong phenomenon of anti-selection. What are the causes?
Well, this is a complex phenomenon, and it's not unique to Romania. We see this phenomena also taking place in other countries in Eastern Europe, for example, in which people are migrating out. And this migration is mostly related to future opportunities. So what countries and ministries of education do in most of the countries is to ensure that students get the skills to go and work. But you also need to have other policies. You need to have a macroeconomic framework that really ensures growth and sustainability of growth, so that there could be a potential for creation of jobs. And on the other side, you also need some opportunities for employers to create jobs. So you need the conjugation of these three. So on the skill area, we know from a report that we have done at the bank that there are some employers feel that there is a mismatch in between what is being produced, in between quote, because education is not a production, but perhaps a rephrasing better will be that the skills that graduates bring to the job market, there is a disconnect between those skills and the skills that employers are requiring. So addressing that mismatch, it seems to be something which is very important. That means to bring the employer's view, could be private or public, more into the education and build incentives so that that communication takes place, and the demands. You know, the labor market is changing so quickly these days with the robotization. There are jobs that existed in the past that do not exist today, and new jobs are appearing. So the system really needs to be the education system really needs to be very dynamic to react to these needs. And that's where we need this feedback and the involvement of the employers, both public and private, so that the institutions are reading very quickly this market. So that's one area. But we also need the private sector to really contribute to this discussion. So this is a very complex agenda, so we need to act in several dimensions on the skill agenda, and that working very closely with employers to really react. At the same time, we need to provide opportunities for people to really use those skills in the country, and that's an agenda of job creation, which goes beyond education.
We have seen at an international level a rather low level of competence in political leadership. Is this aspect also a facet of the crisis in education?
Well, I think that, of course, one of the key messages of the report, is that we need an alignment of all the actors to really make a difference, to really put education and the skills of our children and the future of our children in the fourth center. So that alignment is very important. Some countries, they grow systematically over time because instead of making one step quickly and then reversing 2 steps backwards, what they do half steps, and then they involve all the key stakeholders in education, for example, to ensure the sustainability and agree upon policies. Just to give you an example of the key stakeholders, so you need teachers and the teacher representative to be consulted and to be part of the discussion and also agreeing on this. You need representative of parents. You need, of course, students. You need the ministries of education. You need the employers. So if you set up, we see successful countries in which have sustained educational policies over time, building this dialogue, a very serious dialogue with a vision of a country among all of these stakeholders. And the report is very emphatic. We need to put learning at the center and assessing learning. Second, we need to act on evidence, what works and what doesn't work, but also we need the political alignment of all the actors. So you need the three to really make sustained improvements over time.
Briefly, can you make a ranking of quality of education for geographic areas?
Of course, we have, if we look at the international rankings, we have countries in the East Asia area like Korea, Singapore, which are making progress, lots of progress. And then, of course, we have in Europe, we have Finland's, we have Estonia's, which are really, Poland also are very good. But I will say that the key characteristics of these countries is because they have put education at the center. Look at Korea, it's a country which, South Korea, right? It's a country that they realized after the war that the only asset they have were the people. They didn't have much natural resources or other resources to build upon, and they built a success on that. Now, others, Finland have done exactly the same, Estonia as well. So countries which are successful are the ones that are investing heavily in education. We just produced a report that says that 70% of the wealth of the countries is human capital. So countries which have put seriously human capital at the center, at the same time they have growth a lot. And one of the reports that was mentioned today and it is in the report as well, links the economic growth of the country with the quality of learning. It's not years of schooling, there is no association between growth and years of schooling, there is a strong association between a quality of education and growth. So then to make a map, then you have the East Asian countries, some countries in Europe, and some other countries which are poorer, but they are catching up very quickly, such as Vietnam, for example.
Today, during the conference, the ROSE project was publicly introduced by the World Bank in Romania. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, this is a very strategic project that Romania is implementing. We are just contributing with the financial resources and with some technical assistance, but is implemented by Romania. This is a project that comes from 2015. We are more or less halfway in their implementation. And this project is very important because it's a way through which Romania is taking action on one of the key weaknesses that we observe in the Romania education system, which is the high level of early school leavers. As I mentioned before, the country has more or less 18% of the 18 to 24 years of age leaving education without a secondary education degree. This is really a missed opportunity for the country, especially considering the demographic decline that the country is facing. So you really need everybody in face of the decline in the population to be very well equipped and replace the numbers which are going to be leaving the market. So you need the newcomers to be much better to compensate for the lower levels. So addressing this is really quite important, and the ROSE project is trying to ensure, working with the most vulnerable schools and students, to ensure that they stay longer and graduate from secondary schools, and those who want to transit into tertiary education also have the ability to do so, and that means to prepare for the baccalaureate, but also when these students go to first years of education in universities, they have the tools to really stay there and not drop out also from higher education.
After its implementation, what will be the impact for youth in disadvantaged communities?
So as I said, the project has a focus on the most vulnerable, and what we are trying to do is to achieve 4 results. The first one, at the secondary level, we are trying to decrease the dropouts from secondary education. Second, we want to increase graduation, which is related to that as well, but we want to increase graduation. So those will be the outcomes we expect to have for the most vulnerable in the schools that the project is supporting. In terms of the transition into tertiary education of the most vulnerable, we want to see in the schools that we are supporting, which are the most vulnerable, we want to see an increase in the performance in the baccalaureate, so that students are really have more chances to access university. And also when they go to the university, then we want these students to have a higher retention, or in other words, a lower dropping out from there. So those are the 4 indicators of success that we are tracking, and then of course we are going to be judging the project at the end through those 4 indicators.
Well, the last question, a question you may choose not to answer, but that as journalist I cannot skip. The World Development Report for 2018 stresses the importance of coherence of educational policies. In Romania, in the last 29 years, we have had about 30 ministers of education. How can we achieve policy coherence in these circumstances?
Well, I think that I will choose to answer, if I may, and I would like to introduce a difference between what we consider political volatility versus policy volatility. So, of course, the high turnover of ministers of education perhaps is a reflection of political volatility. But what we have seen over the years is that even though we have observed this rotation, there is a sense of continuity and sustainability of policies. So in terms of policy volatility, I wouldn't characterize Romania as a country which will score high in this. So, for example, in the event that we have today, we have the presence of 7 past ministers of education. That's remarkable. I just chaired a panel with 2 ministers, former ministers of education. 2 were still in the room with us. So we see this sustainability. Even though there is a rotation, we see sustainability of policy and dialogue. That, of course, the volatility or the rotation of ministers introducing some challenges, but overall we see this continuity and the support that these different ministers and the different governments have put in education. So, of course, we will like to have less, but if you ask me, I don't see that the country is going from education policy A to education policy C. We see a continuity even though there is a rotation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.